started. Everyone's got their favorite phrase they start their presentations with. This is mine. History, local history especially, is a puzzle. We've all got our puzzles, our Wordles, or where are the kids playing now? Is Wordle still a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, still is. Okay. Local history is, to me, the ultimate puzzle, but it's a puzzle with most of the pieces missing. And any puzzle fans in the crowd like puzzles? Question, when you start putting the puzzle together, how do you know what the finished thing is going to look like? You have a picture. You have a picture on the box. What's crazy about local history, often that picture is fuzzy. Sometimes it's not even the actual thing. So when I started this research 8 years ago, I thought I was looking for a leper colony. And for reasons you'll see today, I don't think it's exactly that. But what we're going to do, what you're all going to do, is we are going to time travel around, picking up pieces, and we're going to try to put together this story from what's left and find out, kind of in reverse, what that box cover actually looks like. And our goal is to take a dramatic story that really happened in Verona, Wisconsin, and claw it back from the grip of the urban legend it eventually became. If only we had a way to time travel. Oh my God, we do! It's a DeLorean. Glad I brought that. It would come in handy. If you don't get that reference, it's going to be a long day for you. But forgive me that reasons. Seeing that movie when I was 6 is part of the reason I'm standing here now. So let's get ready. You guys ready? Darlene, I need you to do some light blinking. Would you mind going back to the lights back there? I forgot to tell Darlene this in a moment when I cue you. How fast does the DeLorean have to go for time travel? I can't remember. 88 miles an hour. Who said that? Prize. Thank you. Okay, you guys ready? We're going to get up to 88. Darlene, blink the lights. Everyone, we are going to go to this room 7 years ago. Oh, okay, that's bad. Okay, so this is you going, really? You have a time machine and plutonium, and you're going to the Verona Senior Center in 2018. Well, yeah, that's our first stop. I knew we thought it'd be a little more exciting. Before you accuse me of the worst use of a time machine, anyone here, by the way, 2018 when we did this? Do you remember? Yeah, okay, a lot of folks. With history, as in science, the more puzzle pieces you find, the more you have to revise your theory about what that box looks like on that puzzle. And 2 things I want to go on record, right to the cameras and future watchers, is I got some things wrong. I totally got some things wrong in 2018, and I know that. And I also encourage other folks who watch this in the future to keep revising this. It only seems to take a few more puzzle pieces, and then you put them in and suddenly the whole picture changes. So that's kind of our goal. But you're wondering, why should we believe you now if you got things wrong then? Well, first off, a lot of critics in this room, oh my gosh. Let's take it down a notch. But here's what I've got, and I will be, at the end of this year, releasing my full write-up on this with all my sources. I encourage people to look at them. I'll show you how I try to draw things together. But what we have some first-hand accounts, first and second-hand accounts. We have what's known about the Dane County poorhouse. We have hard evidence, like the register, every patient got signed into the poorhouse. Annual reports, these are still downtown, that's my hand there. I stand on the shoulders of the work of others, like these folks, who in 1993 gathered every story and memory they could about the poorhouse, the poor farm, and what they called the leper colony, put it together into a book, made this map. I stand on Mr. Hesselberg's shoulders. Sorry, I'm a pretty heavy guy. George is sitting right over there. And he did this article in 2003 where somehow you uncovered this insanely niche document in the wrong box about the 2 people this story focuses around. And I've based a lot, in addition to being inspired by it, I've based a lot of this around that. So thank you for that. And also, is Jerry Remy here? Okay, Jerry Remy reminded me I should give props to the Dane County Historical Society. They have a plaque up by the original poor home that mentions the leprosy house. Obviously, game changer over the last 10 years, searchable newspaper databases. You can find newspaper articles that happen in real time while this is happening in Verona. But the real game changer, the real reason you should believe me now is because, can we get a drum roll again? Get ready for it. Get ready for it. County board minutes. Okay, and see, Andy, my daughter on sound effects. Annabelle, everyone. This is the most excited you will ever get about county board minutes. And if anyone's been a secretary and had to type up minutes, it's a thankless job. You feel like no one reads them? Well, guess what? 140 years later, someone like this might be reading them to someone like you. I had a light bulb go on 2 years ago when I was looking at little state journal snippets about the leprosy situation in Dane County. I thought, well, what if there are still county board minutes? And I emailed this very helpful clerk at the county named Josh. He found the minutes from those meetings. And these things have dates, they have names, they have decisions. And that kind of blew this wide open. So that's what I stand on. I mean, amazing. There's so much in here. Okay, this is our timeline. Most of what happens today is from 1894 to 1910. But for context, we're going to kind of skate along. Oh my God, it's Marty McFly. Oh my God, on the hoverboard, did you see that? Okay, anyway, sorry, pull myself together. Context to this happened earlier than that. So this is where we're going to be today. We're going to zip along and we're going to put puzzle pieces down. The first one, the very first one, and this story centers around a man named Thomas. And Thomas was born in Norway either right around or after 1850. This is, by the way, this is 10 years after the first recorded U.S. settlers in Verona were living in a hole. So Verona in the hole in the side of a hill. So this is very early Verona. 10 years later, you'll notice Larson in quotes. Oh boy, depending on source, his name is Larson, Lewison, Lewis, Nelson, when they start purposely obscuring his name. It's very hard in genealogy to figure out, I got the right guy or I don't. I'm pretty sure I got the same guy, and I can defend that through this whole timeline. When Thomas was about 4 or 5, something very important happens in Verona that's key to our story. The Dane County selects Verona for the location of the Dane County poorhouse. I'm going to give you, for folks who might not be intimately familiar with Verona, here we are in the senior center. If we head north, we get to the Matt's house, which has Garden Wall Bookstore. As we head east, we've got Pizza Ranch. All of my landmarks are either history or food related. You will notice a theme. And when we get to the end of East Verona Avenue, there's a park and ride there. And if we roll down, you think DeLoreans had roll windows or buttons? If we roll down the window of the DeLorean, or button it, and you look out to the south, here's the park and ride. If you were able to focus on this area, you would have seen this building. But this is the original Verona poorhouse. The book, the register book of this still exists. It is huge. I got to hold it. You can read through it. That's almost actual size. And it explains why people were in the poorhouse. I looked at the first 25 years. The top reasons for admissions were illness, poverty, old age, a lot of abandonment, kids, wives being abandoned by their families, by their husbands, ending up in the poorhouse. Interesting thing, over half the people weren't even born in this country. People were born in these countries, which kind of mimics Wisconsin and Dane County, like in general. They came over from that country, something went wrong, and they ended up in a poorhouse, a place, as John Scherer remembered, because he knew those folks you did not want to end up in. What makes this, side note, what makes this really hit home is when you're going through this box, I know you can't read this, but there is this little note card in there, just kind of loose, saying, "Dear lady, take good care of this child. It has no mother. Never forsake it, and see that it has good care taken of. It was born July 21st, 1892, and her mother was Roman Catholic." This child is in this book. This child was abandoned on a doorstep in downtown Madison, found their way to the poorhouse in Verona, was there for 2 days, and then was adopted by a couple on East Washington Avenue. So hopefully that was a happy ending for that child. But little things like that really kind of make this real when you can hold and see those things. Thomas comes to the United States around the age of 8. He immigrates. Another fellow who actually plays a more minor role than I thought originally, I'm going to call him Ole, although he goes by a bunch of different names too, depending on source. He's Hans, Ole, Yerda with one E, that's probably more accurate. He was born in Norway around 1860. He's important here too. Now my next event is 1871. And I almost, when I practiced this out loud, I said, nothing happened in the 1860s. Then we get to the oh yeah, something happened in the 1860s. My bad there. My buddy Ken Burns would not forgive me. I don't know him. But anyways, 1860, Civil War. Then we jump to the 1870s. Thomas starts showing signs of leprosy. He's here in this country. So without understanding what leprosy, at least high level, what it is, and how it impacts someone, this story is not interesting and it doesn't make any sense. There's just two things I want to mention about the disease of leprosy, now called Hansen's disease. I saw you going, I knew it, Ruth, I think we're in touch. Now called Hansen's disease, but do it. There's kind of a 1-2 punch here. There's the physical effects of this, which is you might go decades not knowing you even have it, and then you start noticing that patches of your skin, you can poke with a pin, you can't feel it. Then sores develop. You might get fevers. Your cartilage starts getting consumed in your fingers and your nose, looking like they're vanishing. You lose your sight. It's a pretty punishing physical disease. But then there's the second half, which is the social aspect of leprosy. Quick survey, where's the first place you heard of leprosy? Maybe by the antiquated term leper. Where's the first place you heard of it in your life? The Bible. Me too. Follow-up question. Was it a good thing or a bad thing to be a... It was bad. It was very bad. And in some cases, it was a punishment from God. It was a sign of moral failure. Not just in the Bible, but across different societies over thousands of years. There was this stigma. And on a side note to my side note, some experts believe in biblical leprosy wasn't even the same thing we know today. It was a translation difference. So that might not even have been the same thing we know as Hansen's disease. But unfortunately, for folks like Thomas, not knowing the cause, each culture had to basically invent its explanation for who got it and why, and what to do with them. And that often led to things like expulsion from society, removal from your family, a variety of torturous cures, and in some cases, just being killed. So this is a 1-2 punch. And a great example of how this stigma still lives with us today is I did a Google I was looking for synonyms for my paper for outcast. Number 4, leper. Isn't that interesting? Because we don't associate this with like breast cancer or diabetes, or what is it about this disease that has this level of historical shame and stigma with it? But another side note, how many cases of leprosy do you think are diagnosed in the world each year today? Do you think more or fewer than 5,000? Do this with your thumb. More or fewer than 5,000? It's actually over 100,000 a year. It's a very now disease in parts of the world that don't have access to adequate medical care. It's still a very now thing. So the last thing I'll say about this is, if you are interested, this guy, Jose Ramirez, he wrote a book about getting leprosy and being treated in the US in the 60s and 70s, and I learned so much from it and the stigma. And it's the reason I don't use the word leper anymore unless I'm talking in historical context. The book is called Squint, if you're interested. Okay, so around the time Thomas is showing symptoms, the biggest breakthrough in leprology happens in 1873. Is David Lonsdorf here? Just checking. The doctor had a question about. This guy Hansen, over in Norway, he's on a mission to identify the cause, and in this primitive microscope, he sees consistently these little rod-shaped specks showing up in samples he's taken from people with leprosy. It didn't look this good, by the way, and I don't think it wiggles. This is just my PowerPoint. But he correctly identified it. He had help from someone staining his microscope slides so he could see them, and that guy actually almost jumped the gun and took credit for it, but then he did, very, very cautiously. The world was not yet ready to believe him, especially not this guy. This guy, Danielson, cool name, he was the father of leprology. He's also the father-in-law of this guy. This guy married that guy. So as we go into Thanksgiving and you're thinking about the awkward conversations you're going to have, think about this dinner table. Anyways, these guys were cordial, kind of colleagues, but they disagreed. Danielson, no, you get this through family lineage. You inherit this disease. Hansen, who was right, you catch it, it's contagious. Took a while, so here is Hansen with his little squiggly bacteria. He's got, I don't know if you can see this from the back, but he's got a little tear in his eye. A little tear. I put that there, that wasn't actually there. Because he wasn't really believed by everyone, or there wasn't a consensus that he was right until much later, almost 1900. That's a long time to be right and not be acknowledged, but that's what happened. I love this because our stuff in Verona is happening in this gap right there, and it's influenced by this across the ocean. Now, if, let's say, well, we know, I ruined it, Hansen is right, but this disease was uncurable. So if it's contagious and uncurable, what do you do with people who got it? You isolate them, that's it. Bad news for folks like Thomas, but that's all you got. So Oldie, who I mentioned earlier, comes to the United States around 1884-ish. So now both of our folks are in this country. And from this point, we're going to jump forward. Actually, we're not going to jump forward, we're going to focus in. I'm going to take this timeline, and it's going to get real now. We're going to zoom into what happened here in Verona from 1894 to 1910. So if you can, let your eyes kind of relax, and zoom. There's a new timeline. We're zooming in. Couple fun facts about Verona. What was happening in Verona in the 1890s? Well, people loved their bicycles. The safety bicycle had just been invented in the 1880s. This is a Verona bicycling club over on Richard Street and North Main Street. House is still there. The Baptist Church built their third building, which is still the building they have today, in I think 1891. And around this time, you all recognize this one, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, this wonderful building was either just built or being built around this time, which is Cahoots today, historically known as the auditorium. But we're zooming in. Our big date is November 28th, 1894, because that is the day Thomas shows up at the poorhouse. And we don't have any pictures of him, so I use a lot of stick figures in this presentation. This is Thomas. In that big book, his entries here, plain as day. Tom Lewison, that's who he is today. He was born in Norway. He had lived in Vienna, which is on the northern border of Dane County, making it the Dane County Poorhouse's purview. And he is the only record we found in that whole book that me and Ruth have been through with a diagnosis of leprosy. They've been around for 25 years now. No one with leprosy had been admitted. He shows up. These guys are the superintendents of the poorhouse. He shows up, and they kind of freak out a little bit from what I can tell, because leprosy, what do we do? Can we even legally have them here with everybody else just mixing up? And guess what they did? They kicked him out. After about 10 days, they kicked him out. So I know you can't read this, but his entry ends with, as the poorhouse was not thought a fit place for him, superintendents of the poor made arrangements with his uncle in Leeds, Columbia County, who will care for him. Leeds is just beyond the northern border of Dane County. So here we go. This is a cool, colorful 1899 map of Dane County. There's Thomas. They send him to live with an uncle just across the border. But that little entry doesn't tell the whole story. The whole story was found in, the full story was found amongst the county board minutes. That's good, thanks. I like a little scratch there, a little house EDM version of it. So in those minutes, we find out they wrote a letter to the Dane County Board, who they answer to. And in that letter, they said, I'm going to read you a couple pieces of this. We deem it necessary to report to you 2 cases of the dread disease. Does any other disease get dread put in front of it regularly? Called leprosy. Both are destitute of means of support. One is Thomas, well now we went from Lewison to Lewis, same guy, of the town of Vienna, who was taken and left at the county house last November. We found it's against the law and rules to keep him here, and we were able to induce friends of him in Columbia County to take and keep him to the 1st of May next for $3 a week. So one thing, they got a timer going. They got till May to figure out what to do with him. Second, $3 a week. I've done some Airbnb, and I have to say, I think it's gone up a bit. That's a pretty solid rate there. They also mentioned the other case, here's Ole shows up, of the town of Bristol. He ought to be removed from his family so the children will be permitted to go to school. And they end by saying, quote, We therefore pray your honorable body take some action and instruct us what to do, end quote. So a little bit of desperation, like, what are we going to do? We're responsible. We don't know what to do with this. So here is Ole up in Bristol. The Dane County Board, what's the joke before you can get a government body to do something? They have to do what first?
Agree.
Form, what do they have to form? They formed a committee. There we go. There's our subcommittee. By the way, that was supposed to be it being born. I don't know if that came across like in my graphic. But they formed a committee to figure out what do we do. That committee took one day to decide, and then they wrote back to the superintendents in Verona, you guys got this. You got this. We're good. You're the right people. Actually, what they said was, the superintendents of the poor are the proper persons to make provisions for these cases. You are hereby instructed to take charge of them, provide for them in the best interest of the county, keep them in some isolated place. You guys got this. You're good. They also said, we should talk to the state, because if the state could handle people with leprosy, it'd be a lot cheaper, in their exact words, than having every county deal with it. And a couple months later, the state said, nope, you got it. You got this. You guys are good. We'll be over here. You got this. So it's fun to see that back and forth. In the state's defense, by 1900, I think there were only between 3 and 7 cases of leprosy in the entire state. So I see why I didn't want to build a building for it, why not? All right, back to our timeline. The poorhouse has been told they have to deal with Thomas and Ole. Over the next year, these two kind of pop up in newspaper articles here and there. Like, for example, here's one about a meeting of the superintendents. It says, the 2 leper cases are a source of considerable expense. I guess that $3 a week really adds up, times 2 people, times, this is 1896. Then, finally, in January of 1896, a team at the poorhouse is appointed to construct a building. So maybe it took them this long to figure, can we put them somewhere in the back? I don't know. They decide to build something at that point. What site did they choose? Well, we're going to go back to our map here. I've also, by the way, added Avanti's for reference because history and food. And since where's Mom? Mom is here, right? My mom is here. I added Costco, too. She loves Costco. And it's, by the way, it's their wedding anniversary, so. 52 or 53?
53.
53, so in honor, we all love Costco, but as you head south and you go past Costco, there is what today is the Dane County Park, the dog park, that 80 acres. Now we're going to time travel. I won't make it blink the lights, darling, don't worry about it. I love doing this. I'll do it one more time. There we go. We're back to 1899. Costco was on the Backer farm. Backer Court, I think that they're actually on. Yeah, that's thanks to Wendy Lacey, by the way. And south of that, here is 80 acres owned by the county. Important thing, detached from roadway. The closest roadway is what we know today as PB, a good quarter mile away. Everything else is landlocked by other people's farms. Don't be fooled there, that's not a road. That's actually a weird property border there. So we have 80 landlocked acres, and they decide they're going to put this structure there. Another interesting thing about January of 1896 is Thomas and Ole are now living together in Bristol with families in the same house. How do we know this? Because of this guy. And because of that guy. That's George Hesselberg, he's sitting right there. And George, it wasn't fair of me to make you black and white. Here, I'm going to put you in color. Because these are from very different generations, but I like image parody. So let's talk about this guy first. This guy is Uranus Owen Brackett Wingate, the secretary of the Wisconsin State Board of Health. When this is all happening, I literally only have his picture because it was on a website dedicated to politicians with silly names. So sometimes, while it probably didn't help him in middle school to be Uranus Owen Brackett Wingate, we know who this guy is a century later. In January of 1896, this is George's source he found, a Bristol school district reported to the Wisconsin Board of Health they had 2 suspected cases of leprosy in their community. Side note, I love side notes, actually sideways. It doesn't look like the county and state were communicating on this because Dane County knew there were 2 people with leprosy there, but someone contacted the state, they send their head doctor to go look at him. Now in this report that George found, we get a really good intimate look at these two individuals. We find out that Ole has a wife and 4 kids from 10 years old to 6 months. He has lost his larynx, he can't speak. He has trouble breathing and he can't work. Thomas has a wife living with him. He has lost all of his toes on one foot, part of a foot, he's lost one eye, and his hands are, quote, crippled in such manner to render him unable to perform any labor. Uranus, or Uranus Owen, I'm not sure which is the first name there, no offense, buddy, but he also makes note that Thomas is being boarded at the expense of the county. So it's acknowledged that he is being boarded there. His instructions, isolate them. Like we decided 10 minutes ago, that's all you can do. Persuade the husband and wives to live apart. Kids can go back to school. Kids are healthy. They don't have to be isolated anymore. All right. Again, thanks to George. I put another thing there because I did not want to, you're shaking your head like, I did not want to forget this because this was key to everything I did. Okay, 1896, we start building this cabin in that spring. Now, wouldn't it be cool to know, let me turn this on you guys, how would you feel if right now leprosy was still incurable and the county decided to build a leprosy cabin in Verona? Would your first thing be like, sweet, I got a lot next to my house? I don't know, hopefully we would. I mean, it's curable now. But I would love to know how these folks thought. How did Verona think about this back in 1896? There are some little clues, some little puzzle pieces in those newspaper articles. One of them is in board minutes. I'll save this long. But you remember how I said the 80-acre parcel was completely cut off from roads? The closest highway was PB over here. The county hired a guy named John Corner on March 3rd to build this cabin. For John to get to the parcel, he had to go over people's land. He got permission, or they got permission, from a guy named Mr. Bodeke to cross his land to build this. Bodeke's not on the maps, so maybe he was a renter or a tenant or something, but he was giving the permission. Then, literally 2 days before they're going to move Thomas there, Bodeke locks his gate, puts a wire around his property and says, I forbid you guys to come over my land. This is in the minutes. So now we got a problem. We're 2 days from moving Thomas in here, and we can no longer get to the cabin we just built in Verona. So this dude, LP Edwin, who was the superintendent, people and patients speak very highly of this individual in accounts from back then. He decides, he checks with the attorney, he can't just buy county land with county money in 2 days. I imagine you still can't do that today. He dips into his own pocket, and he pulls out $46.50. And he buys a strip of land to go from what's today Highway PB to that parcel. It's 1,300 feet long, 33 feet wide. And that's almost $1,800 in today's money. So I mean, if you've ever had to pay for something for work and hope they reimburse you, $1,800 this guy did. Thankfully, they fully reimbursed him by unanimous vote at the next meeting. So he's good, but pretty cool solution. This road, anyone go to the dog park? You ever go to that dog park? This is Westner Lane today. So it still is used to connect PB to that parcel. So every time you drive in there, you're driving on the road that only exists because some dude dipped into his own pocket 100 years ago, which I think is just awesome. Westner was cool, I've met his daughter, but they probably should have put that guy's name in the road too, in my opinion. Why? Why did he have to do this? Well, there's also a hint in there too. Why did Bodeke change his mind? There's a little tiny sentence that says, this is the county, we've been informed that there was a great feeling in the community against locating the leper house in the town of Verona. So people started pushing back. This is really, I wish we knew more about this, but that kind of explains the context. So here we go. Finally, in late spring of 1896, we have our cabin built. Hooray! Years ago, I never would have thought I'd know, and by the way, this is not a picture of the actual cabin. This is a PowerPoint art, just wanted to make that clear. But I never thought I'd know much about this cabin. But thanks to those board minutes, I do. And I also went back and I found its Zillow page. Wow. Okay, so the page is fake, but all of the information in here is accurate. This cost the county $330, which is $12,000 in today's currency, almost $13,000. It was 616 square feet. It was 22 by 28. Oh, I should have measured that out in this room so you could see. But it had 3 bedrooms, a sitting room, a closet, a pantry, and a dining room. I'm guessing they were probably future-proofing this thing, thinking they'd have to use it again, because Thomas and Ollie do not need 3 bedrooms. And a kitchen, and a sitting room, and I mean, that's pretty nice. Unfortunately, Thomas moved in alone in early summer of 1896 because Ollie died right before. He never actually got to live in the cabin that was partially built for him. But Thomas moved in there alone in summer of 1896. And here we are. Now, I'll spoil it a little bit. Thomas lived there for 6 years, mostly, but not entirely alone. And wouldn't it be cool if we knew what this time was like? Wouldn't you love to know what his life was like? Well, again, little puzzle pieces you can pick up, and we can turn to a variety of sources. As far as his basic needs, food and supplies were brought to him from the poorhouse by other residents. We know this because the superintendents mention it in the articles, but also, this is Gladys. Some of you probably knew Gladys. When I did this presentation, she was sitting right here where Lisa was sitting in 2018, and she worked at the poorhouse in the 1940s, and she got to know a lot of people there, including Elizabeth Dorman. Elizabeth had lived there since she was a child in the 1880s, and Elizabeth would tell Gladys stories about bringing food down Highway PV to the leprosy house. So basic needs are cared for. What's interesting, though, is there was also a near constant stream of visitors. This is weird. You wouldn't think this would be like it became kind of a curiosity. People would go, I'm talking like judges, priests, people visiting, journalists would stop by the poorhouse, the asylum, and they'd go swing by the leper house, in their words, while they were there. It shows up over and over and over. And you would see these in newspaper articles like, about the town. I went down to see the lonely leper, in their words. A day at the Verona Asylum. This judge went to visit. So it's very interesting, I think, because we're isolating this person, yet he becomes almost like I don't want to say like a tourist attraction, but so many people would just visit him out there. And you'd read about it in these articles. Side note, after May of 1900, after Thomas's first and last name were in the paper over and over, Superintendent Edwin, the guy who bought that road with his own money, he changes his tune. He starts saying, quote, "It's painful to relatives and friends," unquote, to publish family info, including his name in the paper. So in 1900, he starts just calling him Tom, and he says he's New Region, he's from Dane County. Then in 1901, Edwin won't even give his name anymore. He says, quote, "As relatives are sensitive." He doesn't use his name. So there was no HIPAA back then. There was no concern for his medical security, but it was the stigma. It was the stigma of being associated with this family name that cost Thomas even his name until today. Big sigh. Get ready with your second sound effect, Annie. Big sigh here. Not all press was this pleasant. About 6 months later, this article was published in Chicago, in Wisconsin, and as far away as Montana. And this might help explain the urban legend aspect of this. And I'm going to use the chiller font here because this article was clearly intended to scare you. Good enough, I'll take that. So this is dramatic garbage, this article. I'll read this to you. "The people of the vicinity," this is in Bristol, "were only dimly aware of the terrible nature of the disease, and the lepers mingled freely with their fellow men, exposing all to the contagion." Oh, are you getting scared already? Now, this article purports, without evidence, that most Americans descend from countries that do not have immunity to leprosy. The immigrants from Norway and Sweden are bringing this disease. It's going to take over this country as a biblical plague. Every American town will need to build a lazaretto to quarantine all the people who are going to get infected. It also said that Thomas and Ollie, not by name, both moved into the cabin with both of their wives, which we know is not true, because Ollie had died by then. One of them died in the cabin, they're a little close there, and that his wife had a baby in the cabin. All right, so I have a new place where I'm going to put this article. I'm going to go ahead and just put that there. This article, I actually put way too much faith in this article back in 2018 because it was one of the only articles I had. I didn't have county board minutes. Now I know it's just alarmist garbage. But actually, before I throw it away, it is useful because it gives you an idea what people were thinking about this disease, at least in the press back then. So it's valuable for for context. Okay, so moving on. But let's get to something happier. This is a happier story now. Here are those 80 acres. Up here by Costco was the Backer family. And we have this really cool story that Walter Backer, I know Ruth, anyone else know Walter? You do Walter. This is Walter as a boy living in the farmhouse right up here where Costco is. Here he is as an older gentleman recording. He actually typed up his memories, I think on typewriter in around 1990. He remembered, against his parents' wishes, when he was about 10, so around 1910, him and his friends would sneak in to the area and go view the old leprosy house. And it was falling down, and woodchucks were storing things in it. And it was a thrill. He said that the thrill was too much, we couldn't resist. He also heard a story from people in his area that this guy, John Hack, who was a neighboring farmer, or someone from the Hack farm, I think were his exact words, would come by and play cards with the people or the person in the leprosy house. So that's kind of cool to think that maybe Thomas had a friend stopping by and, I don't know, playing Texas Hold'em or whatnot, and that this neighbor never got leprosy. Not everybody afraid of this disease. For all the stuff you read in the Bible, I think historically a lot of very religious charities have done some of the best work for people with this condition. So maybe, if this is true, this is a great story about him having a friend there. Here is a happier story we can confirm with evidence. I noticed a lot of the articles during that time frame keep mentioning an attendant. He lives there with an attendant. And when I believed the garbage article, I thought, well, maybe that's one of the wives we heard about. Well, this dude's name starts showing up in some of the articles. And I know this is hard to read, but his wants are looked after with much sympathy by William Bradley, a pauper. And here we go. Mr. William Bradley had been a faithful attendant to the unfortunate for a number of years. So who's William Bradley? Who is this? I can't, yeah, he was a resident of the poorhouse. He's in the book. He was born in Ireland. William was a bit of a frequent flyer. He was in and out of the poorhouse 5 times in 15 years. 4 of those overlapped with Thomas's stay. The reason for admission was just vagrancy, which is a pretty general term. I can't say for sure that Thomas and William were friends or became friends, but the way they write about William is written that's different than someone who just stops by to drop off food. Like, for example, when Thomas was nearing the end of his life, this was written in the newspaper, that his wants are looked after with much sympathy by William Bradley, a pauper who is deserving of great credit for his kindness and labor. And actually, in William Bradley's entry in this register, his last entry is, when he passes in 1910, it says, his money earned in caring for his leper was used to give him burial in the Verona cemetery and for a headstone. I cannot stress how unusual that is for someone in the poorhouse to be buried in the Verona cemetery with a headstone. They were either, when they passed, they were claimed by family, they were taken to Science Hall by the UW for medical research, or they were buried in the little cemetery next to Gus's diner. William got an actual plot. So I guess somehow he was earning money doing this that was left over when he passed. So Annie and I went to try to find him. He's in the Verona Cemetery records. He ended up in a family plot in a little part that wasn't used by anyone else. And the family plot is the Gleason plot. And he would be right about here. No headstone. Really wanted to see that. Now it could have been there. Headstones, as Art will attest, sometimes they sink. You find them down there, right? Especially little ones that have been there for a century.
I found them under.
You found them under what, a foot or 2 of dirt?
Yeah.
So on my to-do list is first talk to someone on the cemetery board and see if we can get permission to go and probe and see if we can find this guy's, Mr. Bradley's headstone. That would be very cool. But he would be right about in that. So I hope it's still there. Okay, now we're getting towards the end of our time period. In January of 1902, Thomas's 6th year in the cabin, a Reverend S. Gunderson a Lutheran minister visits from Mount Horeb. And his visit is talked about in one of these articles. And this is a very, very cool little peek into what Thomas's life was like. Mr. Gunderson, this is the Reverend, spoke words of comfort to the afflicted man and later administered the sacrament. The afflicted man, who is a devout Christian and bears his suffering with much fortitude, was greatly relieved by the minister's visit, and he has now resigned cheerfully to his fate. William Bradley is also mentioned as his attendant in this article, and the article mentions that Thomas cannot walk, he's completely blind, he can't use either of his hands at this point. This is 1902. 9 months later, on Saturday morning, November 1st, 1902, William Bradley arrives to check on Tom in the morning and finds he has passed away in his bed. Thomas is given the next available plot at the Poorhouse Cemetery by Gus's Diner, there he is, between Anna and Joseph. And he is plot 94. Unfortunately, his headstone was not one of the 84 that we have found, so we can't replace it. He's in this gap right there on the south end. He's in plot 94, but if you go there, we put it back 93 and 95. So if you want to visit Thomas, he's between those two, but we didn't find his headstone in that other big topic. Okay, so here's y'all again. We're at the end here. This is y'all. Where was the cabin exactly? We know it was on the 80 acres, but like where? I want to go see it. I want to see if there's a piece of it. Okay, so these folks from 93, they gathered every story they could. There's Gladys, there's Jerry Maurer there. Art, there's you. You're there in the back. Yeah, there's Art. Cool. Well, they put together all their information. They also made kind of a crude map of what they believed were the foundations of what they called the leper colony. Here's Jerry standing next to it. It's 2 rock piles, and here is a satellite's in 1937. Here's an aerial photo from 1937 of the park, and you can see these 2 rock piles are there. So they go back at least that far. Here is this is LIDAR, which is when you use lasers to penetrate vegetation. People use it from planes to look for effigy mounds and such, because you can see the ground, its forms without having plants get in the way. Through the park, there's some points of interest. None of these turned out to be a foundation. I looked at these with an archaeologist kind of informally. There's those 2 foundations. And with the LIDAR, heck, this one looks like a rectangle, and this one just kind of looks like a hole. This is that whole 80 acres. There it is. So, anyone from Prairie Moraine friends here? Anyone here from Prairie Moraine? Okay, well, I have to give them a major shout out because it's overgrown, and twice they have cleared the vegetation so that we can go look at it, photograph it, and measure it. Here's my son out there last spring looking at one of the sites. And here's a drone photo that my buddy took. There are 2 sites. This one is to the east. This one is to the, actually, I got this backwards. Give me a second here. Yeah, this is, north is down. Sorry, this isn't the best way to put this. This is the one to the west, and there's the one that is to the east. The west one, you try to keep your mind from making up too many puzzle pieces, but I think that this one looks the most like a kind of oval shape. It's what seems to be like a wall. There are a bunch of little stones. If we were to superimpose, which we did, remember the footprint of the house was 22 by 28? That looks like this. So I know I'm trying to fight my mind from saying like, yes, that's it. But that footprint kind of fits in either of these, but there's 2. And the minutes were very clear, at least at this point, there was 1. Who knows what that second thing is? But, plausible. Now, so what you're thinking next is, well, was there a colony? That's what the legend is. Could there have been a colony? Well, if you know science, it's almost impossible to prove that something doesn't exist, because if I said there was no colony, I'd have to account for every second of every moment in all of Verona. But I can say if there was a colony, it would have to fit in some pretty tight cracks. Here we are in 1840. These are the first recorded U.S. settlers living in that hole in the ground. So it wouldn't have been before that. Poorhouse shows up in 1854. That log book covers all the way to about 1930. Only Thomas is in there as the only person with leprosy. Thomas's cabin, falling apart and abandoned by 1910. I know that in 1919, cool little side story, another person with leprosy was found in Dane County, and people were like, oh man, we're gonna have to bring that leper house again back. And then they realized the guy had just moved there earlier that year, and he wasn't there long enough to qualify for benefits, so they punted him back to Sauk County. But in these articles, the poorhouse superintendent confirms this cabin has not been used since then. So we know there was no colony here. He also is one of two sources that says, after Thomas lived there, another person with leprosy lived there very briefly and was even cared for by William Bradley. William Bradley died in 1910. I've only found 2 mentions of that. So maybe someone else was in and out of that cabin during that time. And then after that, anyone know Vernon Duppler? Vernon Duppler was a longtime farmer in South Verona. There was kind of in the 1993 packet, there was talk that Vernon remembered, in their words, lepers coming down to his farm and where Scheidegger Park is, watering cattle, and then fishing in his family's creek. But I got to speak to Vernon in the late 20-teens, and the rest of his story was he saw those same people go all the way back to the poorhouse every night. They would take their fish, they would try to sell it by the side of the road. So I don't think there was a leper colony here around this time, because that story was people who were then housed. And he also said too, the neighbors called them, quote, lepers, but he's not even sure if they had leprosy or if people just use that term. After him, now, here's young John again. Wasn't young John cute? Wasn't he adorable? So John's memories and other folks in our historical society reach back to the 40s. So there was no leper colony in Verona after this. Like, there's no way you could sneak this by. All of these people, I mean, this was very known, and I would imagine a colony would be even better known. So I would say, my personal opinion, I don't think there was a leper colony. I think it came from stuff like this. I think stuff from like this feeds into the machine, it swirls, and maybe not with the speed of the internet, but it swirls around and spits that out. If there is, it would have had to fit in a little gap here. But then again, puzzle pieces. I can't say there wasn't. Maybe I'll be here 8 years from now being like, damn it, there was a leper colony. Crap. Delete, old video, delete. Who knows? You never know. But I don't think there was. It would have to fit some pretty small cracks. And that, just to bring it all back to the start, I hope you all enjoyed putting this puzzle, what's left of it, back together. It was crazy fun. There's never been a better time to try to dig into mysteries like this with the internet and newspaper databases and helpful clerks down at the Dane County office. So I encourage you all to find your favorite topic, dive into it. I didn't even talk about how many, when you go home later and you're falling asleep, think about how many themes from this are still relevant today. People afraid of the people coming over and bringing the disease, or there's this disease we don't understand. What do we do with those folks? Like, all these themes, just Thomas's story, in addition to being very interesting, and there's a cosmic weight to giving someone back their story and their identity. There's also the benefit of us looking in the mirror and being like, man, could this happen again? Did it happen again? Does it happen again? And that's kind of, I think, what my favorite part of this was. And that's it. Thanks, everyone. Do you want to? I'd love to open up for questions. See if you can stump the tall bald guy. Is anyone here? If we have questions, Annie, will you mic run? Here. Yeah, I'd love to hear. Most of this was me in the basement when my family is sleeping, but now they're teens, so they're actually upstairs. So most of this is me by myself. So it's always fun to hear what other people think about it. Do you have any questions or stuff about this story? Yeah, Annie, can you run it over to Brian there? And this is my daughter, Annie. Not only does she do sound effects, she can run
sound.
Brian.
John Coroner, who built the cabin, was he from Mount Vernon area?
Oh, there's his name with a K. John Coroner and the money. Nothing more than that.
Okay, well, he built barns around Mount Vernon, so I wonder if he...
Was it with a K?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then...
You got any pictures of him?
Probably, but and then the Reverend Gunderson, you might check the records of the church at the time.
Yeah.
To see if he was called out. They kept good records. So.
Thank you. Which church would you just the?
That would be Evangelical Lutheran.
Thank you. I really wanted to find his picture, but I couldn't, so he was just a stick figure with a little.
Oh, yeah, there are lots of pictures of him, yeah.
Oh, great. It'll make this better in my next one. Uh-oh, wait, what? I did not do that. But hey, what better time for that to happen? Hold on, let me turn this back on. Oh my God. It's actually off. Okay, hold on a second, y'all. What? I will thank my lucky stars that this happened right now. Not when I'm like, think about yourself. Let me get this back for y'all. Well, actually, all we really need is the mics, and the mics are working. Cool. Thanks for the comments, Brian. More needs to follow up. Got other questions or thoughts?
Of something. Do you know what that is?
That is this foundation. So the question, let me see if we can, the battery's dead. Okay, so the question, I'll just relay the questions. At the dog park, there is a foundation. That is the foundation, that one I was showing you about with the little overlays. That is, and the cool folks at the dog park friends, they're working with us to put some signage on there. And we actually have a decent draft that we're gonna probably work on for this next spring.
So is that where the house was?
Well, that's the thing, is we know the house was in those 80 acres. We know the size of the house, but we don't know exactly where it was. And I left one thing out. The 1993 group who drew the map, they indicated that was the house, but I don't know how they determined that. So I can't ask them. Walter Badker was friends with Jerry Maurer and a lot of those people, and Badker's the guy who would explore it when he was a kid. But that's too much of a jump for me to say like, well, that must be it because Jerry knew Walter. But I have hope. So a lot of the stuff you guys saw here was just a one-off article or a thing in a box. I was like, holy God, how does this exist? I'm guessing somewhere in the 20-some boxes of stuff from the poorhouse, someone drew a map back then. Maybe they had to send a contractor out there and they drew. I think we'll uncover where that thing was. But for now, it's a likely, but can't prove it. And so we'll have to adjust our signage to say, we know everything here happened, everything you saw happened in that park. We just don't know for sure that that was the cabin. Yeah, thanks for asking. What other questions? Yeah.
So how did the county acquire the 80 acres? Did someone not pay their taxes?
Aha, great question. How did the county acquire that 80 acres? I know roughly when they did. The first Verona plat with actual ownership was 1861, and the next one is 1873. In 1861, it was owned by a B.F. Perry. In 1873, it's owned by the county. I'm sure if I took a day and hung out downtown, I could find out why or where. So I don't know why, but I know it happened in that window. And I know it was covered in trees. It was a wooded lot. They used their wooded lots for fuel for the poorhouse, so I would assume that's maybe why they got it, or that's what they used it for. But I'm not sure exactly why B.F. Perry lost their 80 acres. Yeah, next question.
The question is, those of you that are familiar with Norwegian immigration, Norwegian churches,
Yeah.
the old Stav churches back in Norway,
Yeah.
they built those big Stav churches. They were built in the 1100s, 1200s. Around the outside of the Stav churches, the lepers were able to get communion. They could not come into the church, but they could be around the outside of the church. So leprosy was common in Norway at that point in time.
Good point. And actually, interesting thing, the book that I mentioned, that by Jose Ramirez, it's called Squint. Here, you put a battery in, thanks. So a squint is what they called the little thin thing that the people with leprosy could peek through. And he also used it as a wordplay because as it damages your eyes, you end up squinting a lot. So yeah, you're a good point. In churches, they had the squint where they would go. And gosh, that book it really changed my whole, Jose Ramirez's book called Squint, changed my whole perception of this disease.
So is it
Yeah.
actually not inherited, but is it actually transmissible? And what's
Yes. Yeah, it's transmissible. So they think maybe the susceptibility might be something you inherit, but it is oh gosh, I left that off my map. You know what, I finished the map, the timeline. Remember my timeline? In the 1940s is when they had the first actual cure for leprosy. I think it was a dapsone and a combination. This is when antibiotics had their heyday with penicillin and whatnot. They found ones that could actually kill, it's a bacterium that Hansen found. But they don't reverse damage. So when you take the medicine, and it's not like you take it and you waltz out the door the next day, it's a long, painful process to heal. It was for Jose in the book. In the 80s, I think World Health Organization came up with a cocktail that's a lot more effective now, and certain groups are trying to get it to parts of the world where this is still endemic. But yeah, bacteria can be cured, 1940s. So man, Thomas, if he'd been just 2 generations later, just 2, he might have gotten gotten that here, and this story would be a lot more boring. Yeah, Jim, what's your question?
Well, from what I understand, there's an animal that is the only animal that's an armadillo.
Yeah,
Contract leprosy.
armadillos can house the bacterium on their bodies, but I do not know. George, you know anything about armadillos and leprosy? I know you know about this more than I do.
Well, they can contract the disease, but they don't really die from it. They can hold it.
Can we catch it? So George mentioned they can catch it, they can hold it, but can we get it from
No,
armadillos?
I think that's a myth.
Okay, interesting. I mentioned that there's hundreds of thousands, over 100,000 people every year. There's a paper you can find at the Mayo Clinic's website. In the 20-teens, they did a study on a small handful of people they treated for leprosy. I think all of them had acquired it overseas in places where it's more common and come back here. But it was a very now thing, even for Minnesota in the 20-teens, people with this disease. Cool. What other questions do you have? This is, yeah, we'll hear them there. What's your question?
Okay, I first heard about the leprosy, and was referred to us as a leper colony,
Yeah.
from Harlan Dulk. Now,
Yeah.
how does he play into this? He was the town chairman of the
Yep.
town of Verona for many, many years, which this was in the town of Verona.
Yep.
He was also on the county board for many years.
Yep.
And supposedly when he, I don't know, when he retired, that he did some research on this, or he was instrumental in getting a sign in, or what?
Yeah, I can talk about this. So Harlan Dulk was a local figure, probably a lot of you knew, and he was in the 1993 group. He was in that picture
Okay.
by the monument. And in their book, which is in the library and our website, you can just click and read it. He interviewed, or he talked about a conversation he had with Rudy Roethlisberger, another person a lot of people knew, and he relayed Rudy's story about carriages bringing food to the leper colony down PB. I talked to Rudy's family, Phil and Laura, and Rudy was not in Verona until I think the 1920s. And we know this part was happening well before that. And what we don't know is why both those folks are very trustworthy. We don't know where Rudy got the story from, because Rudy probably, unless there was a colony in the 20s that we don't have any evidence of, he might have been relaying a story he'd heard from someone, but unfortunately, we can't ask either of those guys.
He did?
Yeah.
What was the last name of Rudy?
It was Rudy Roethlisberger. He's the one who gave Harlan Dulk the story.
Lived just farther south of there. Would their family have been there at that point?
So which one?
Roethlisbergers are just down PB from this area.
Yeah, the question was, would the Roethlisbergers down TV have known more about it? I'm not sure. I mean, I know Laura, I knew Phil, and I actually called Laura and Phil years ago and asked them about Rudy, because I was trying to figure out, could he have been here in 1906, and that's where I found out. So they would have told us if that story still lived in their family. I think I would have heard about it from Phil, so I guess I'm not sure.
I mean, the way we kind of heard the story, in addition to them bringing food out from the county home
Yeah.
or the poorhouse, that the lepers were buried there, but you're saying that's not the case.
So the question, and I love this, is the story had that the lepers were buried on site. And that's all I had in 2018 when I did this talk. It was...
Maybe it was the rumor from what you said that started that.
I start rumors, but I didn't start that. I'm probably the one that I started. It was really in the articles around 93 when they did that. It was very, I don't want to say dodgy, but it was more like, we assume that because people isolated them in life, they would isolate them in death. And then I still remember the moment in my basement while you guys were all asleep, where after I figured out Thomas Lewison's name, I think because Ruth had typed up that poorhouse book, I found him in the cemetery map by Gus's Diner, and the dates matched. So we know he ended up there, we know Oldie never lived there, so at least we know he's buried by Gus's.
So unless there were some other lepers, there's probably none of them
Yeah.
buried there. I was kind of worried when they made a dog park out of it, if a dog came back with a bone.
Well, if a dog comes back with a bone, I'm all over that. I love some hard evidence. First off, we'll let the police handle that, and then the historians and stuff. And yeah, a lot of that, and that's why this is such a cool topic, because the legend and the story has reverberated through the generations since then. And I wish I could make a graph of, true thing, evidence fades. You couldn't Google search this. Then people who remember the legend grows. At some point they cross, and then maybe today we reversed it. But no,
I guess I didn't realize that it was just an 80, because now there's another 80, there's 168.
right. Another great topic. I love this because you guys there's stuff I cut for time just in case people were bored. and you guys are hitting them. So you might notice if you go there today, there's the 80 acres, then there's another 80 that's offset, which is now the Ice Age Trail. That was the Burmeister farm, and when they built the leprosy cabin, that was owned by the Burmeister family. There's a dot near PB that could have been a structure of some sort. The county acquired that land in early 1900s, very early. And I also found in one of their annual reports, when they bought that farm, they sunk a bunch of money into fixing the well that was there. And it got me thinking, like, oh man, you've got 80 acres, touching 80 acres, you've got a leprosy cabin, and now you've got a well you're fixing. Did you fix it for Thomas? Did you fix it, or did you start using the farmhouse as the leprosy cabin? My mind goes crazy, but I try to stick to what there's some kind of evidence to like suggest.
See, when we moved there in 1972, the whole 160 acres during the summer would be pasture land from the county home.
Yeah, yep. It was pasture land used for cattle. You want me to? Any other questions before? Hey, can you give George?
First, thanks for all your research, Jesse. It's great stuff.
Thank you for the inspiration.
The question I have for you is, did you find any other historical societies that have done similar research in their areas on immigrants and leprosy? Because the Norwegian researchers tracked over 160 to Wisconsin and Minnesota, and those places still have active historical societies. I'm wondering if there's any other records on that.
That would be an awesome next project. Because I was pretty hyper focused on Verona. I did zoom out sometimes for perspective. Like I think in around 1900, there was the Surgeon General told every state. Was it 1900? I think the report was in 1902. Said every state in the United States, tell us how many leprosy patients you have.
There was a big media thing in Wisconsin, out of Milwaukee Sentinel, that published articles like the one you showed.
Cool.
That said we should stop letting Norwegians immigrate to Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And there was a big campaign in Congress because of.
Wait, what are we missing? Are there Norwegians in the room right now? I think we may have pushed a nerd. We're talking historically here. We like y'all. You're fine. Yeah. No.
Very interesting. It's a very interesting topic.
George, I have a question for you. So when I talked to you 2 or 3 years ago when I got to meet you for the first time, and you told me at the time that you have an interest in the topic, but you might have resources. Were you ever going to revisit this yourself too, or do you still write it?
I'm always revisiting the leprosy among immigrants story.
Yeah.
Because that goes back to Norway being the first country in the world to keep a leper registry back in the 1850s was when they started it. So all the lepers in the country had to register, usually through the churches. That's why they had the list of the immigrants to the United States in Wisconsin, and why they sent Norwegian researchers to Wisconsin back in the 1880s
I did not
to
know that.
prove or disprove Hansen's theory about heredity or infections.
Wow.
So they came twice, they sent doctors here to track down the lepers, to see whether whether their families also had the disease. Or whether
Did they find that they did?
Well, of course, some of them were Danielson supporters and they sort of fudged their stuff. But otherwise, they found that it wasn't being handed down from family to family because you can only get it through long, intimate contact with somebody who's a leper. And that's why it was all in one place along this coast of Norway, around Bergen, for example, very popular disease, and further north. That's why the leprosarians were all there.
Good point. I also didn't mention is all the reading I did. Very difficult to contract, and most of us, I saw like 95% from one, I think it's that, are immune to it.
Right.
We can't even catch the thing.
So the hysteria is totally unnecessary.
Isn't that nuts?
Yeah.
Well, if you ever want to come back and talk about some of that, I got a place.
But that's, just don't get me started on leprosy.
Yeah. Anyone else? Other questions or thoughts? Oh, Ruth, you had a question? Yeah. There you go.
Was there any confirmation that after the leper colony out on PB was closed, that they took care of the people at the poorhouse? Did you find something to refute that?
Well, actually kind of confirm it. So 3 things. So Vernon Doubler's story from 1927, how he would see people called lepers and would go back to the poorhouse. That kind of suggests, assuming they actually had leprosy, they were being cared for there. And also another thing, if you remember Elizabeth Dorman, who was the lady that Gladys Spanky got to know, who actually took care of these folks, in one of the articles, when she passed, it was actually she became like a local celebrity because she was in her 80s, 90s, and she lived in the poorhouse since she was 8. It mentions, one of the articles mentions that she used to, she was not afraid of people with leprosy and she would take care of them. And it says she would take care of them in people who were in little sheds or something on site. Now that could just be a journalist getting fast and loose with the facts. But it also might suggest that they moved the care. Maybe, by the 1940s, we had a pretty workable cure-ish. So yeah, that suggests that they kind of came back. But you and I, we never found, of course, the register we looked at only went until 1930. So, a huge book. But that could suggest that they moved them back with Vernon's story. Yeah, 2 puzzle pieces I'm trying to kind of smash together. You know, you do that when they look like they're supposed to fit. And you're like, I can make this fit. Yeah. Cool. Other questions? Thoughts? Oh, can you back there? Andy, can you run to the back? In the purple. By the way, if anyone needs to leave, I am not offended. Just get up and go. You made it this far, so I am honored. Yeah, question.
This is a question about leprosy, not about.
Okay.
And my question is, so I lived in Hawaii. We went to, Molokai.
Yep.
And this was in the 70s, and they were still a colony. But you're saying there was a cure.
So that was the Father Damien colony from the 70s, 1880s. There were leper colonies, and they were called leper colonies. There was the one that Jose Ramirez lived in down in the South, United States, I think Louisiana, that was called a leper colony. Multiple buildings of people with leprosy. There was a Father Damien one on Molokai that was building after building, pretty rough. There's a lot of stuff written about him. So there were colonies, and that one, I think what's cool at Hawaii is they've leaned into the history of it. They've preserved the buildings. People were allowed to continue living there even after there was a cure, because some people, like in Jose's leper colony, they wanted to stay because it's all they'd ever known. So even though they got treatment, they wanted to live out their life there, and they were allowed to. So yeah, there's a connection to that. And
What was going on in the 70s that they were cured, but they wanted to stay?
well, the cure, so the Father Damien stuff was late 1800s, and then the cure was started in the 1940s, but it wasn't a smoking or a silver bullet at that point. I'm not sure when the Hawaii and Molokai was phased out, but there was actually, in 2018, I actually played a video at the start about the Father Damien and Molokai stuff to give perspective. So no, you're right on. It all kind of ties together. Yeah, Andy, you have a question?
Clarification.
Yes.
What makes a leper colony? Is it like a specific number of people who live in one place who have leprosy? Like, what is a leper colony?
Great. Awesome question. So first of all, we can see is with most things that are just vague, it doesn't take much, because that article called what we had here a leper colony, but traditionally the ones that people agree, okay, they were, means dedicated to the care of this disease, multiple people in some kind of living condition, and isolation is the main thing. You are here to live the rest of your days there, away from everybody else, and we will take care of you to the best we can.
So what makes this one specifically not a leper colony? Was it just the fact that there wasn't enough people there, or was it too small?
Good question, Andy. So to me, it's the numbers. It hits some of the marks. The disease was present, the isolation was present, he was cared for, but I only found evidence that it was one guy and one cabin, and then one guy maybe after him. So to me, that is not, when people like this gentleman grew up hearing about the colony, it puts images into your mind of this massive structure with tons of people. And I just haven't found evidence that existed.
Do you think if the other guy lived long enough to move into the house, would it then be considered a leper colony?
I love that question. Oh, is your dad a historian? Those are great questions. This is great. What if Oldie had lived to live there? Could we call it the colony? I don't know. Andy. But we're gonna have some great conversations over dinner for this. Thank you. Well, my opinion, it would take more than 2 people, but I guess it's one of those historical fuzzy terms. So, yeah. What other questions? Well, how about we do this? I'm gonna hang out here. If you have more questions, come up. Let's talk. But thank you everyone for being part of my dream day. And then we'll be back in January with another topic. We're lining up. Oh, Lisa. if you'd like to sign up for a one-year membership, Lisa is right here with the green bag. It's $15, and if you want to join our email list, somewhere the pink thing is there. And you could be a member for a year, and it just supports projects and stuff. 10 for an individual, 15 for a family. What about for a colony? 40? 40 for a colony. Okay, thank you everyone, have a great night, thanks for coming.